It's Sunday afternoon. The living room is packed. Everyone's gathered around the television, eyes glued to the screen, shouting at plays, celebrating touchdowns, groaning at penalties. The energy is electric. The room pulses with collective emotion. And you're sitting there, trying to look engaged, nodding at the right moments, forcing enthusiasm you don't feel. But inside, you're completely disconnected. You don't understand why everyone cares so much. You don't feel the stakes they're feeling. You're rewatching grown men chase a ball across a field and you cooey and access whatever it is that makes this matter to everyone else. So you pull out your phone, you wait for halftime, you count the minutes until you can leave without seeming rude, and you wonder, quietly, what's wrong with you? Why can't you care about this thing that everyone else seems to live for? Why does something that brings so much joy to others leave you feeling nothing but bored, confused, or vaguely alienated? Welcome to the psychology of people who don't watch football. And if this is you, you already know what it's like to exist outside the cultural mainstream, to be the odd one out in a world that treats football not just as entertainment, but as essential shared experience, as social currency, as something you're simply supposed to care about. This is about more than just sports preference. It's about identity, belonging, and the subtle ways we're told what we should value. Today we're diving deep into why some people simply cannot connect with football. What's happening psychologically when everyone around you is invested in something you find meaningless, and what it reveals about how we form interests, communities, and sense of self. Because not watching football isn't just a casual choice for many people. It's a position that often comes with judgment, isolation, and the constant low-grade feeling that you're somehow failing at being part of the culture you live in. And understanding why some people don't watch football tells us something profound about human psychology, about tribal belonging, about how we decide what matters and what doesn't. Let's start with the obvious question. In a culture where football dominates, where Super Bowl Sunday is practically a national holiday, where Monday morning conversations revolve around weekend games, why would anyone not watch? The simplest answer is lack of interest. Some people just don't find it engaging. They've watched 22 people running around a field and they feel nothing. No excitement, no investment, no emotional pull. And that's fine. Preferences are preferences. But the psychology goes deeper than simple disinterest. Because for many people who don't watch football, it's not just that they don't enjoy it, it's that they actively don't understand the appeal. They look at the passion, the devotion, the emotional investment that fans pour into games, and they genuinely cannot comprehend it. Why are you screaming at the television? Why does it matter which team wins? Why are you devastated about the outcome of a game played by people you've never met? This disconnect isn't judgment, though it can come across that way. It's genuine confusion. It has the psychological experience of being unable to access something that seems to come naturally to everyone else. Research in sports psychology has identified several factors that influence whether someone becomes a sports fan. One major factor is early exposure. People who grow up in households where football is important, where games are family events, where parents model fandom, are significantly more likely to become fans themselves. It's socialization. It's learned behavior. You don't come out of the womb caring about football. You learn to care because the people around you care. Because caring means connection. Because being a fan is how you belong to your family, your community, your culture. But some people don't have that early exposure. Maybe they grew up in households where sports weren't emphasized. Maybe their parents were indifferent or actively disinterested. Maybe they were raised in environments where intellectual pursuits were valued over athletic ones, where reading was prioritized over watching games. So they never developed the neural pathways, the emotional associations, the sense of tribal belonging that comes with fandom. And now, as adults, they can't manufacture that connection. They missed the critical window. The foundation was never laid. There's also a personality component. Research from the Journal of Sport Behavior found that people who don't watch sports tend to score higher on certain personality traits. They're often more introverted, preferring solitary or small group activities over the communal experience of watching games. They tend to be more individualistic, less drawn to group identity and tribal belonging. They often have what psychologists call a high need for cognition, meaning they prefer activities that are intellectually stimulating over those that are primarily emotional or sensory. For these people, watching football doesn't satisfy their psychological needs. They're not energized by crowds. They're not fulfilled by collective emotional experience. They don't get the dopamine hit from their team winning that other people do. Their brains are literally wired to find satisfaction in different things: reading, creating, learning, exploring ideas. And football, with its emphasis on physical competition and tribal loyalty, just doesn't activate their reward system the way it does for fans. Let's talk about the tribal aspect, because this is huge. Football, like all sports fandom, is fundamentally about tribalism. You pick a team, that team becomes your tribe. Their victories are your victories. Their losses are your losses. You identify with them. You wear their colors. You use we when talking about them, even though you're not on the field. This tribal identification fulfills a deep evolutionary need. For thousands of years, humans survived by belonging to groups. Being part of a tribe meant protection, resources, identity, and our brains still crave that. We still need to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. For many people, sports fandom satisfies that need. It gives them a tribe in a world where traditional tribes, family, community, shared culture, have weak, but not everyone needs this. Some people satisfy their tribal needs in other ways, through their work communities, through online groups, through shared interests that aren't sports, and some people simply have a lower need for tribal belonging. They're comfortable being individuals. They don't need the collective identity that fandom provides. So when they look at football fans, they see people deriving identity from something external, something arbitrary, and it doesn't resonate. It doesn't make sense because they've never needed that kind of belonging to feel complete. Here's something fascinating. People who don't watch football often report feeling alienated during cultural moments when football dominates. Super Bowl Sunday, March Madness, Monday morning office conversations. These become spaces where non-fans feel invisible, excluded, othered. Everyone's speaking a language they don't understand. Everyone's referencing shared experiences they didn't have. Everyone's bonding over something they can't access. And this creates a specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who are connecting over something you can't participate in. Studies on social belonging show that feeling left out of dominant cultural narratives, even small ones like sports conversations, can impact mental health and sense of community. You start to feel like you don't quite fit, like you're on the outside of something essential, like you're missing a gene everyone else has. And this can lead to either attempting to fake interest, which feels exhausting and inauthentic, or withdrawing, which reinforces the isolation. There is also a gender dynamic that can't be ignored. Football, particularly in American culture, has historically been coded as masculine. Boys are socialized to care about football. Men bond over games. Male identity is often intertwined with sports fandom. So when a man doesn't watch football, he often faces more scrutiny than when a woman doesn't. Other men question his masculinity. They make assumptions about him. He's labeled as soft, pretentious, or just not a real man. Women who don't watch football face less of this pressure, though they face different expectations. They're often expected to at least understand football for the men in their lives, to watch for their partners, to participate, even if they're not genuinely interested. So gender shapes the experience of not watching football in distinct ways. For men, it's often about defending your masculinity. For women, it's often about resisting expectations to perform interest you don't feel. Let's examine the judgment that non-fans often face, because people who watch football can be evangelical about it. They don't just enjoy it. They believe everyone should enjoy it. And when they encounter someone who doesn't, there's often a response that ranges from confusion to outright hostility. How can you not like football? What's wrong with you? You just don't understand it. There's an implicit assumption that if you don't watch football, you must be missing something, lacking something, or actively choosing to be difficult. But this judgment reveals more about the person giving it than the person receiving it. Because when your identity is deeply tied to something, when football fandom is part of how you understand yourself, encountering someone who doesn't share that can feel threatening. It challenges the universality of your experience. It suggests that maybe this thing you've invested so much meaning in is actually universal or essential, and that's uncomfortable. So rather than accepting difference, there's pressure to convert, to explain, to insist, to make the non-fan see what they're missing. But this rarely works, because interest can't be manufactured through argument. Now let's talk about the intellectual snobbery that can exist on the other side. Some people who don't watch football position themselves as intellectually superior. They see football as lowbrow, as mindless entertainment for people who can't engage with more sophisticated pursuits. They look down on fans as sheep, as people wasting their lives on something meaningless. And this is just as problematic as the judgment going the other way, because there's nothing inherently inferior about enjoying sports. Football is complex, strategic, requires understanding of tactics and athleticism. Fandom builds community, creates shared joy, provides an outlet for emotion. Dismissing it as stupid or beneath you is its own form of narrow-mindedness. The healthiest position is simply acceptance. Football isn't for me, but I don't judge those who love it. I recognize that people find meaning in different things, and that's okay. But this level of acceptance requires security in your own preferences, and not everyone has that. There's an interesting phenomenon where people who don't watch football become almost invisible in certain spaces. Bars during game season, family gatherings on Sundays, office environments during playoffs. These spaces are organized around football. The social interactions assume shared interest. And if you don't have that interest, you're functionally not part of the group. You're physically present, but socially absent. Research on minority stress, usually applied to racial or sexual minorities, actually applies here too in a smaller way. When you're constantly in environments organized around something you're excluded from, it creates low-level chronic stress. You're always adapting, always performing, always aware of your difference. This isn't traumatic, but it's tiring. It's the psychological tax of existing outside the norm. And over chimie, it can lead to either total withdrawal from those spaces or development of coping mechanisms, learning to redirect conversations, finding the other non-fans, creating parallel social experiences while everyone else watches the game. Let's discuss what people who don't watch football do instead, because it's not like they're sitting in empty rooms staring at walls. They're filling that time with other things: reading, creating art, pursuing hobbies, spending time in nature, having conversations, building different kinds of community. And often these pursuits are deeply meaningful to them in ways that football never could be. They're not missing out. They're just experiencing life differently. The problem is that football is so culturally dominant that it becomes the default. The assumption is that everyone watches. So if you don't, you need a reason. You need to justify your absence. But people who watch football are never asked to justify why they spend hours every week watching games. It's assumed to be normal, valuable, worthwhile. So the burden of explanation falls on the non-watcher, and that's exhausting. Having to constantly explain that you're not interested, that you'd rather do something else, that you don't think there's anything wrong with you for not caring. There's also the economic aspect. The football industry is massive, billions of dollars, and participating in football culture often means spending money on tickets, merchandise, streaming services, going to bars, hosting parties. People who don't watch football opt out of this entire economic ecosystem. They're not buying jerseys. They're not paying for NFL packages. They're not organizing their consumer behavior around supporting their team. And in a capitalist society where consumption is tied to identity, this is another way they exist outside the mainstream. They're not contributing to this particular economy. They're spending their resources elsewhere on books, concerts, travel, different forms of entertainment. And there's something quietly radical about refusing to participate in such a dominant cultural and economic force. Here's what's interesting about the psychology of not. Many of them don't think about football at all until they're forced to. They're not sitting around actively rejecting it or thinking about how much they don't care. They're just living their lives, pursuing their interests, being themselves. It only becomes a thing when they in situations where football watching is expected or when they face judgment for their disinterest. This reveals something important. Not watching football is unusually an identity for these people the way watching football often is for fans. It's just an absence, a non-thing. They're not anti-football activists. They're just people who happen to not be interested. But the culture treats them as if they're making a statement, as if their disinterest is a rejection of something sacred. And that says more about how much we've elevated football in our collective consciousness than it says about the people who do and watch it. Let's examine the neuroscience briefly. When fans watch their team play, their brains light up in specific ways. The mirror neuron system activates, making them feel like they're part of the action. Dopamine is released when their team scores, creating pleasure and reward. Cortisol spikes when their team is losing, creating stress. The social bonding hormone oxytocin increases when they're watching with other fans, creating feelings of connection and belonging. This is real. This is measurable. Football creates a genuine neurochemical experience for fans. But for people who don't watch, these systems don't activate. Their brains don't respond to football the same way. They might get these same neurochemical responses from other activities, from creating music, from solving puzzles, from having deep conversations, but not from watching sports. So it's not that they're incapable of passion or investment. They just direct it elsewhere. Their brains find reward in different stimuli. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just variation in human experience. The question of authenticity comes up here. People who don't watch football often wonder if they should try to become fans, if they should force themselves to care for the sake of fitting in, for social ease, for career advancement in cultures where bonding over sports matters. And this is a real dilemma because faking interest is exhausting. It requires constant performance. Remembering team names, pretending to care about outcomes, manufacturing enthusiasm you don't feel, it's inauthentic. It chips away at your sense of self. But the alternative, being openly disinterested, can come with social costs. Being excluded from conversations, from bonding opportunities, from networks that form around shared fandom. So people face a choice. Authenticity with potential isolation, or performance with potential belonging. Neither feels entirely good. The healthiest path is probably finding spaces where your authentic disinterest is accepted, where you can connect with people over things you actually care about. But in work environments or family situations where football dominates, this isn't always possible. Let's talk about what football represents symbolically. For many people, football is more than just a game. It represents tradition, continuity, shared cultural experience. It's something that connects generations. Fathers and sons bonding over games, families gathering for Thanksgiving football, cities uniting behind their teams. It's ritual. It's meaning. It's how communities create shared identity in an increasingly fragmented world. And people who don't watch football are opting out of these rituals. They're disconnecting from these shared meanings, not intentionally, not maliciously, but simply because these rituals don't resonate with them. And this can be perceived as rejection, as disrespect for tradition, as failure to participate in community. But here's the thing. Tradition and ritual are only meaningful if they're authentic. Forcing yourself to participate in rituals that don't resonate isn't honoring tradition. It's performing it. And performance without genuine connection is hollow. There's a class dimension too. In some communities, particularly working class communities, football is deeply embedded in social fabric. It's entertainment, community, identity. Not watching can mark you as pretentious, as someone who thinks they're better than their roots. But in other communities, particularly certain educated urban spaces, not watching football can be more normalized. Intelligence and culture are defined differently. Reading literary fiction and going to independent films might carry more social currency than knowing sports statistics. So whether your disinterest in football is accepted or challenged often depends on what class and community you're part of. This reveals how arbitrary these cultural values are. Football isn't inherently important or unimportant. Its value is socially constructed. And depending on your social location, that construction will either include you or exclude you. Here's something people who don't watch football often experience: relief when they find others like them. Because when you're constantly surrounded by fans, finding another non-fan feels like finding your people. There's immediate understanding. You don't have to explain. You don't have to justify. You can just exist without performance. And often these connections lead to conversations about what you do care about, what does excite you, what creates meaning in your life. And you realize that your disinterest in football isn't a lack, it's just different allocation of attention. You're not empty where others have fandom. You're full of other things, other passions, other interests, other ways of connecting and belonging. And that's equally valid. The moral of this isn't that football is bad or that not watching makes you superior. It's that we all have different psychological needs, different sources of meaning, different ways of connecting with others and with culture. Some people need the tribal belonging of fandom. Some people need the intellectual stimulation of solitary pursuits. Some people need the emotional catharsis of watching competitive sports. Some people need the quiet satisfaction of creating something with their hands. None of these is better. None of these is more evolved or more sophisticated. They're just different. And a healthy culture makes space for difference. It doesn't insist that everyone participate in the same rituals, value the same things, find meaning in the same places. So if you don't watch football, here's what you need to know. You're not broken. You're not missing something essential. You're not culturally deficient. You're just someone whose brain finds reward and meaning in different places. And that's okay. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't have to justify your preferences. You don't have to pretend to care to make others comfortable. You can politely decline. You can redirect conversations. You can find your people, the ones who get it, who don't need you to perform interest in things that don't resonate. And you can build a life that's organized around what actually matters to you, not what you're told should matter. But also, try not to judge. Try not to look down on people whose passion is football because their experience is as valid as yours. They're not less intelligent or less evolved because they care about sports. They're just accessing meaning differently. They're building community differently. They're experiencing joy differently. And if we want space for our own preferences, we have to make space for theirs. The goal isn't to convert anyone. It's not to prove that your way of being is better. It's to coexist, to accept that humans are diverse, that we find satisfaction in different places. That culture is big enough to hold multiple ways of being. And to the football fans reading this, consider this a window into a different experience. The people in your life who don't watch football aren't trying to insult you. They're not judging you. They're not trying to ruin your good time. They're just existing with different preferences. And maybe instead of pressuring them to care, instead of making them explain instead of organizing every social gathering around games, you could make space for them. You could ask what they do care about. You could find common ground in other places. You could accept that loving football doesn't mean everyone has to love football. That your tribe can include people who aren't part of this particular tribal identity. Because at the end of the day, whether someone watches football or not is such a small thing. It's one interest among thousands. One way of spending time among infinite possibilities. One form of belonging among countless others. And the amount of meaning we've attached to it, the amount of judgment that flows in both directions, the amount of identity we've built around it is disproportionate to what it actually is. It's entertainment, it's community, it's ritual. And those things matter, but they're not universal. They're not requirements for a meaningful life. They're options, choices, preferences, and people who choose differently aren't failing. They're just choosing differently. And that should be okay. That should be unremarkable. But in a culture that's made football so central, so assumed, so omnipresent, it's not unremarkable. It's othering, and maybe that's what needs to change. Not converting not dismissing fans, but expanding our understanding of what counts as normal, as valuable, as legitimate, making space for people to opt out without judgment, making space for people to opt in without superiority, making space for everyone to just be themselves, whether that includes football or not. Because life is too short to spend it pretending. Too short to perform interests you don't feel. Too short to judge others for feeling differently than you do. So watch football if it brings you joy. Don't watch if it doesn't. And let's all agree that either choice is fine. That neither says anything fundamental about who you are as a person. That we can coexist, connect, build community across our differences. Because ultimately, we're all just trying to find meaning, find belonging, find joy. And there's so many paths to those things. Football is one, but it's not the only one. And the people walking different paths aren't lost. They're just walking somewhere else. And that's okay. That's human. That's the beautiful diversity of conscious experience. And there's room for all of it.